The princess saw the human fight unarmed, and her heart chose him immediately. The grand arena was alive with energy as the crowd roared. It was the day of the great challenge, where warriors from across the galaxy came to test their strength and skill. The princess sat high upon her throne, her eyes scanning the arena below. She had seen many warriors fight, some with weapons and armor that made them appear unstoppable. Today, however, something felt different. There was a human among the challengers. The human was not dressed in the thick, shining armor that others wore. He stood alone in the center of the arena, unarmed, wearing only the simple clothes he had arrived in. The princess watched him closely. The crowd jeered, laughing at the idea of a human trying to fight against the mighty alien warriors who had been trained for this very purpose. "Look at him," one of the onlookers said. "He's just a human. What could he possibly do?" The princess did not respond. She simply studied the human with a quiet curiosity. She had heard stories of humans before, about their resilience, their endless ability to survive against impossible odds. But she had never truly believed them. Today, she would see for herself. The bell rang, signaling the start of the battle. The humans' opponents, armed with sharp blades and heavy shields, stepped forward, eager to prove their superiority. They looked at the human with scorn, their eyes filled with the arrogance that came from years of winning battles in this very arena. The first warrior lunged forward with a powerful strike, aiming for the human's chest. But in a movement too quick for the eye to follow, the human dodged the blow. The crowd gasped. No one had expected that. The warrior was momentarily off balance, and the human seized the opportunity. He grabbed the warrior's arm, twisting it with surprising strength. With a swift motion, he knocked the weapon from the warrior's grasp, sending it clattering to the ground. The princess leaned forward, her interest piqued. She had expected the human to be overwhelmed in moments, but he was holding his own. The fight continued. The second warrior charged, swinging a sword at the human's head. But once again, the human moved with speed, ducking low and sweeping the warrior's legs out from under him. The crowd erupted into disbelief, their cheers mixing with the confusion of not understanding how a human could do such things. The third and final warrior approached cautiously, clearly aware of what had happened to the others. This time, the human did not wait for the attack. He sprinted forward, using his opponent's hesitation to his advantage. In a flash, he was upon the warrior, his bare hands locking the warrior's wrists and forcing him to the ground. The warrior struggled, but the human was relentless. He pinned the warrior down, his muscles straining with the effort. The crowd fell silent. Not a sound could be heard as they stared in shock at the human, now standing victorious. He had done the impossible. He had defeated 3 mighty warriors without so much as a weapon. The princess's eyes widened, her mind racing. She had never seen anything like this before. The human stood there, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling with each breath. His clothes were torn, but he showed no sign of fear or exhaustion. He had done what no one had thought possible, and as the princess looked at him, something stirred inside her. She could not explain it, but she felt a connection to him, a feeling she had never experienced before. Her heart raced, and for a moment she felt a strange sense of admiration. She had witnessed countless battles in her life, but never one like this. The human had fought with nothing but his strength, his skill, and his sheer will to survive. He had proven himself in a way that no one else had. And in that moment, the princess realized that she was not just watching a warrior. She was watching someone who had the heart of a true fighter. As the human was led from the arena, the princess could not take her eyes off him. Her mind was filled with questions. Who was this human? Where had he come from? How had he managed to defeat warriors much stronger than him? The answers seemed unclear, but one thing was certain: the human had earned her respect. The crowd slowly began to stir, murmuring amongst themselves. The princess did not hear them. She was lost in thought, her gaze still fixed on the human who was now disappearing from view. She had seen many battles in her lifetime, but she had never felt this way about a warrior. There was something about him, something that made him stand out among the countless others who had come before him. As the princess sat back in her throne, her thoughts raced. She had been taught to think logically, to prioritize her duties above all else. But now, something inside her felt different. She had witnessed the power of a human, a species that many considered weak and insignificant. And yet, this one human had proven himself in a way that few ever could. The princess had no idea what would come next. but she knew that this was just the beginning of something far greater than she could ever have imagined. And so, as the arena emptied and the echoes of the battle faded, the princess's mind was left to wonder. Was this human truly as weak as everyone believed? Or was he something more? The answers would come in time, but for now, she knew that her heart had already made its choice. The human had returned to the palace, his every step watched by the curious eyes of the royal guards and the staff. He had been taken from the arena, his body still bruised and battered, but there was a certain calm about him that set him apart. The princess had ordered him to be brought to her chambers, her curiosity growing with each passing moment. She needed to understand him, to see if the stories about humans were true, or if there was something more to this one than anyone had guessed. As he entered the grand hall, the princess was already waiting. She sat in a high-backed chair, her posture regal and graceful, but her eyes betrayed a hint of unease. She had watched him fight, but now she wondered what kind of person he truly was. What did he think of his victory? What was he feeling after taking down the warriors that many of her people had feared? The human approached her with a respectful bow, though he appeared neither awed nor intimidated. "Your Highness," he said, his voice steady yet soft, as if he were still gathering his thoughts. The princess nodded in acknowledgement, her eyes scanning him carefully. She had never spoken to a human before, let alone one who had earned her respect. There was something in the way he stood, confident but not arrogant. He was no different from any other warrior in that respect, yet he felt different. There was a quiet power in his presence. "Tell me, human," she began, her voice calm but direct, "what brings you here? Why do you fight for a cause that is not your own?" The human shifted slightly, his eyes steady on hers. "I fight because it is what I know," he replied simply. "On Earth, we fight to survive. We fight because it's the only way to keep going. I'm no different from any of the others in the arena. I just want to prove that I can stand tall when faced with impossible odds." The princess studied him, her gaze intense. She could see the truth in his eyes, but she wondered if there was more behind the words. His reason for fighting seemed so simple, yet so profound. For a moment she did not speak, her thoughts drifting to her own life, one of duty, power, and the unyielding weight of the crown she wore. She had never fought for survival. Her challenges had always been ones of politics, strategy, and the preservation of her empire. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. "Jackson," he answered. "Jackson Carter." The princess repeated the name softly to herself. It had a foreign ring to it, unlike the names of those she was used to hearing. She couldn't explain why, but she found herself remembering it, as if the name itself held weight. "Jackson," she said, her voice no longer the commanding tone of a ruler, but something softer, more curious. "Where are you from?" "I'm from Earth," he replied, his voice even, though a flicker of emotion passed across his face. "A planet far from here, it's not a place like this where power is everything, where battles are fought for control. On Earth, battles are fought for survival, for the right to live." The princess leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "What is your home like? Tell me more of your people." Jackson's eyes softened as he spoke. "We're a diverse species. We fight, but we also create, build, and dream. Earth is a planet full of conflict, but also one full of hope. We're not perfect, but we try to make things better. We're constantly learning, always searching for meaning." The princess listened carefully, her mind working to understand this strange, distant world. Earth sounded so different from her own. Here, the laws of power were simple: survive by conquering, grow by dominating. She had never thought about the other side of conflict, the side that Jackson spoke of, where humanity fought not to rule, but to persist. For the first time, she found herself questioning everything she had been taught. She had been raised to believe in the superiority of her people, to trust in the strength of her empire and the might of its warriors. But Jackson, with his simple words, was showing her a different side of life, a side that she had never truly considered. She gazed at him for a long moment before speaking again. "Your people, are they all like you?" she asked. "Are they all willing to fight for survival, for hope?" Jackson's expression became more serious. "Yes, most of us are. We're not all the same, but when it comes down to it, humans will fight for what's important to them. We may not be the strongest or the most powerful, but we're willing to stand against impossible odds when we have to." The princess took in his words, her mind racing. He spoke as though he had seen things, experienced battles that had shaped him into the man who now stood before her. She couldn't help but admire his resolve, his willingness to face death with the same calm demeanor as he faced victory. In many ways, Jackson was a mystery, a puzzle she had yet to solve. "Tell me, Jackson," the princess said, her voice thoughtful, "what do you want now? You have proven yourself in the arena, but what do you hope for now that you are here?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, as if he were weighing the question in his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer now. "I hope to leave this place. I didn't come here to fight for anyone else's cause. I came here to survive, to prove to myself that I can. But I don't want to stay in a place where I'm just a pawn in someone else's game." The princess listened, feeling a strange pull in her chest. She knew that his words carried more meaning than he let on. He had come to the Empire not by choice, but by circumstance. And now he was trapped in a situation that he did not want to be a part of. "I can't promise that you'll be free," the princess said quietly. "But I can promise that I will not treat you as a mere pawn. You are more than that. You've shown me that." Jackson looked at her, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "And what does that mean for me?" The princess paused, her heart beating a little faster. "It means that I will help you. If you want to leave, I will find a way. You deserve more than just being used in a fight. You've earned my respect, Jackson." Jackson seemed to consider her words, his gaze steady. "You're not like the others," he said softly. "You're different." The princess didn't reply immediately. Instead, she simply nodded. She wasn't like the others, she knew that. And she had no idea why this human, this warrior, had come to mean so much to her so quickly. But there was no denying the truth of it. As the moments passed, the princess felt something shift within her. She had been taught to keep emotions in check, to always remain in control. But with Jackson, she felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A connection, a desire to know him more, to understand him. And she knew, deep down, that her heart was already beginning to choose him. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet for the princess. She spent her time in meetings with her advisors, making decisions that would shape the future of her empire. But even in the midst of her duties, her thoughts kept drifting back to Jackson. She had never expected to be so affected by a human, someone so different from her in every way. But there was something about him, his strength, his calmness, his ability to face danger without fear, that had drawn her in. She had always been taught that the strength of her people, her empire, was unmatched. But now she couldn't help but wonder if there was something else. Something she had missed in all the years of ruling. Jackson, the human, had shown her a side of life that she had never considered. He had fought to survive, to prove something to himself. He had done it without weapons, without the protection of armor, and yet he had emerged victorious. And now he was here in her palace, a symbol of something more than mere strength. The princess was unsure of what to do with these feelings. She had always been in control, always made decisions based on logic and duty, but Jackson made her question everything. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that something had shifted within her. She couldn't deny it. She was drawn to him. One evening, after a long day of meetings, the princess found herself walking through the gardens of the palace. The night air was cool, and the stars above seemed brighter than usual. She needed some time alone to think, to clear her mind. As she walked, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. "Jackson," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He stopped a few feet away from her, his eyes watching her in the moonlight. "Your Highness," he replied, his voice calm and steady. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The princess could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken words hanging between them. She had never felt like this before. There was a connection between them, something deeper than anything she had experienced in her life. She had never allowed herself to feel this way, but with Jackson it felt natural, almost inevitable. "I've been thinking," she said finally, her voice soft, "about everything. About you, about my empire. I've spent my whole life building something strong, something powerful, but now, I wonder if I've been building the wrong thing." Jackson stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "What do you mean?" "I've always believed that strength comes from power. That ruling with force, with control, is the only way to maintain order. But I've watched you fight, watched you survive, and I see something else. You fight with your heart. You fight because you have something to fight for, not because you want power, but because you want to live, to protect the things that matter." The princess stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "I've never known what that feels like. To fight for something more than just duty, more than just my position." Jackson looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "You've always had a purpose, Your Highness, but that doesn't mean it's the only way. You can fight for something else, something that matters to you, not just to the Empire. You don't have to be bound by your title. You can choose who you want to be. Her heart raced as his words sank in. She had always believed that her title, her role as the princess, defined her. It was who she was, who she had always been. But now, standing here with Jackson, she realized that there was more to her than just the crown. There was a part of her that longed for something more, something real, something that wasn't defined by duty and politics. "I don't know if I can just walk away from everything," she said quietly. "I've spent my whole life preparing to lead. I've been taught that my people need me, that I am their strength." Jackson stepped closer, his voice low and reassuring. "Your people will still need you, but you don't have to give up everything to lead them. You can lead with your heart, with compassion. You can show them that there's more to strength than just power." The princess felt a surge of emotion rise within her. She had never allowed herself to think this way, but Jackson was right. There was more to life than just the empire, more to her than just the weight of the crown. For the first time, she felt like she could be more than just a ruler. She could be a person who could care, who could love, who could live freely. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. Jackson reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you do have a choice. You can decide what comes next, what you want for your future. It's your decision, Your Highness." The princess looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt so conflicted, so unsure of what the future held. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she had the power to choose. To choose what mattered to her, to choose what she truly wanted. "I've always been told what to do, what my role is," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to choose for myself. I want to find my own way." Jackson smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made her feel more at ease. "Then that's your first step. You've already made it." The princess took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle over her. She had always known that her life would be one of responsibility, but now she realized that she could still have her duty and her freedom. She could be both the ruler her people needed and the person she wanted to be. For the first time, she felt truly alive. The two of them stood in the garden for a long time, the quiet night wrapping around them. The princess knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that it was the path she wanted to take. With Jackson by her side, she felt like anything was possible. The days after their conversation in the garden passed quickly, each moment filled with a mix of anticipation and fear. The princess had made a decision. She had chosen to walk a different path, one that wasn't dictated by the expectations of her empire, but by her own heart. The weight of that decision was heavy, but it was also liberating. For the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. However, the challenges that lay ahead were not easy to ignore. The princess knew that her decision to protect Jackson, to help him escape the palace, would not be accepted by everyone. There were many who would see this as a betrayal, a weakness. Her advisors, the nobles, and even some of her closest friends would not understand why she was risking so much for a human. To them, he was just an outsider, someone beneath their consideration. But to the princess, he was more than that. He was a symbol of the future she could create, one of hope, of freedom, and of choice. As she walked through the palace halls that evening, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. She turned, already knowing who it was. Jackson. He had been spending most of his time in the palace's lower levels, far from the watchful eyes of the guards. But tonight, he was walking alongside her, his expression serious. "I think it's time," he said, his voice steady. "Time to leave. We can't keep hiding here forever." "They'll come for us?" The princess nodded. She had been expecting this. The moment she had decided to help him, she knew they would have to escape. There was no other choice, but the fear of what might happen next was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. "I know," she replied, her voice quiet. "I've made arrangements, but it won't be easy. We'll have to be careful." Jackson didn't respond immediately, his eyes focused on the path ahead. The tension between them was palpable. He knew the risks just as she did. The escape would not be a simple thing. There would be dangers along the way, danger from her own people, who would see her actions as treason, and danger from the unknown, as they ventured outside the safety of the palace walls. But despite the fear that filled the air, there was also something else, something unspoken, a sense of resolve. They had made their choices, and now there was no turning back. Later that night, as the palace settled into its usual quiet, the princess and Jackson prepared for their escape. They gathered their belongings in silence, careful not to make a sound. The princess had arranged for a secret passage that led outside the palace grounds. It was a path that had been used long ago, before the palace had been fully constructed, and it had been forgotten by most. The two of them moved through the halls like shadows, the silence between them almost suffocating. They passed by rooms where the royal guards were stationed, but no one seemed to notice them. The princess's heart raced in her chest as they made their way to the passage. She couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they were caught. What would the consequences be? Would she be punished for her actions? Would Jackson be sent back to the arena, forced to fight again? But even with all the uncertainty, she knew she couldn't stay. She couldn't continue living in a world where duty was all that mattered. She couldn't ignore the pull in her heart that told her there was more to life than power and control. Finally, they reached the entrance to the secret passage. The princess paused for a moment, her hand resting on the hidden door. She turned to Jackson, meeting his gaze. His expression was calm, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson nodded, a small but firm smile on his lips. "I've been ready for this for a long time." Without another word, the princess opened the door and they stepped into the darkness. The passage was narrow, the air stale with the smell of age. It was a far cry from the grandeur of the palace, but it felt like freedom. The farther they moved from the palace, the lighter the weight on her shoulders became. She had made her choice. She had decided to follow her heart, and there was no turning back now. As they walked through the tunnel, the princess couldn't help but think of everything they were leaving behind. The palace, her throne, her family, her empire. She had spent her entire life preparing for this role, but now she was choosing to walk away from it all. It was terrifying, but it was also the most freeing feeling she had ever known. They moved quickly, knowing that time was not on their side. The longer they stayed in the palace, the greater the risk of discovery. They reached the end of the passage and stepped out into the cool night air. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a soft light over the landscape. For the first time in what felt like forever, the princess took a deep breath, filling her lungs with fresh air. "We have to keep moving," Jackson said, his voice low but firm. "The guards will be searching for us soon." The princess nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead of them. They would need to cross through the city, away from the palace, and find a place where they could hide until the danger passed. The thought of being caught, of being dragged back to the palace, made her stomach turn. But she couldn't think like that. She had to believe they would make it. As they made their way through the streets, the princess kept her head down, careful to avoid being seen by anyone. The city was quiet at this hour, the streets mostly empty. It was late, and most people were already indoors. But even so, every footstep felt like it echoed in her ears. She couldn't help but feel the eyes of the city on her, even though no one was watching. Jackson stayed close, his presence a steady reassurance in the chaos of her thoughts. He had been with her through this entire journey, from the moment he had stepped into the arena to the night they were escaping the palace. He had never hesitated, never questioned her decisions. It was something she admired in him. Something she didn't realize she needed until now. Eventually, they reached the outskirts of the city, where the path to freedom lay. The princess could see the distant hills, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. Beyond them was the wilderness, a place where they could disappear, where no one would be able to find them. "Are you sure about this?" Jackson asked, his voice steady but filled with a hint of concern. The princess turned to him, her gaze steady. "I'm sure. This is the only way." With that, they stepped into the night, leaving the palace, and everything they had ever known behind. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and risks, but for the first time in her life, the princess felt a sense of hope. A sense that no matter what happened next, she had chosen her own path. And with Jackson by her side, she knew they could face whatever came their way. The journey ahead was long, and the uncertainty of what lay before them kept the princess's thoughts racing. The night had been their only cover, and now, with the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon, they were exposed to the world outside the safety of the palace. The princess glanced at Jackson, walking beside her through the dense woods. His face was calm, but his eyes held a sense of alertness, always scanning the path ahead. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as they walked in the early morning fog. Jackson's reply was steady, reassuring. "We have to. There's no going back now." She nodded, though the weight of the uncertainty hung heavily on her shoulders. The life she had known, the title she had carried, was now a distant memory. She had chosen a new path, one that was free from the expectations of her empire. But even now, walking through the quiet woods, she couldn't help but feel the loss. She had left everything behind, her family, her throne, her people. It was a painful decision, but one she knew she had to make. They walked for hours, taking a path through the dense forest that shielded them from the eyes of the outside world. The princess had no clear plan, only the hope that they could make it to a place where they could hide, where they could start over. But as the day passed and the sun rose higher in the sky, her worries grew. What if they were caught? What if the Empire sent soldiers after them? What would happen to Jackson if they were found? These thoughts swirled in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She couldn't afford to think about what might happen. She had to focus on what was in front of her. As the day wore on, they found a small clearing near a stream. It was secluded, a perfect place to rest for a while. They sat by the water's edge, both of them exhausted from the long journey. The princess leaned back against a tree, closing her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a brief moment of peace. "Do you ever wonder what you'll do once we're free?" Jackson asked, breaking the silence. The princess opened her eyes, looking at him thoughtfully. She had been so focused on escaping that she hadn't really considered what would happen next. The idea of being free, of having control over her own life, was still new to her. She hadn't thought about what she would do without the throne, without her royal duties. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never really had the chance to think for myself. My whole life has been about duty, about ruling, about keeping the empire strong. I don't know what it feels like to be just me." Jackson nodded, understanding. "It's not easy. Freedom means making your own choices, facing the consequences, and living with them. But it also means you get to decide who you want to be. You get to live for yourself." The princess thought about his words. Could she really live for herself? Could she find a way to be something other than the ruler of an empire? She wasn't sure, but for the first time, she felt like it was possible. "I've spent so long living for others," she said softly, "but I think I want to live for me now. For the first time, I want to know what it's like to make a choice that's just for me." Jackson smiled, a warm and reassuring smile. "Then that's the first step. And I'll be here, helping you take it." The princess couldn't help but feel grateful for Jackson's presence. He had been with her through everything, from the moment she had watched him fight in the arena to the decision to leave her life behind. His support, his calmness, made her feel like she wasn't alone in this. For the first time, she realized that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She didn't have to do everything by herself. As the day drew to a close, they made camp by the stream, the fire crackling between them. The princess gazed into the flames, lost in thought. She had always been taught to look ahead, to plan every step of her future. But now everything seemed uncertain. There were no guarantees, no safety nets. But there was something else, something more important: hope. She had hoped that she could find a new path, that she could start over and create a life of her own. And she had Jackson by her side, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone in this journey. As the fire burned low, the princess and Jackson sat in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The night was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The princess felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The pressure of the throne, the expectations of her empire, seemed like a distant memory now. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could breathe. The next morning, they set out again, continuing their journey into the unknown. The princess didn't know where the road would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer bound by the empire. She was free to make her own choices, to live a life that was hers to control. Days turned into weeks as they traveled through forests and across rivers, always staying one step ahead of those who might be searching for them. They moved cautiously, always alert, but the further they went, the more the princess began to feel a sense of freedom. Each day that passed brought them closer to a life that was theirs to shape. At times, the princess would glance at Jackson, her companion, her ally, and she would realize just how far they had come. She had once been a princess, destined to rule, bound by the expectations of her people. Now she was someone different, someone free, someone who could choose her own future. And Jackson had been there through it all, standing by her side, not because it was expected, but because he believed in her. One evening, as they set up camp for the night, Jackson turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said. "I never thought I'd be here walking beside a princess of all people, but here we are, and I think we're doing all right." The princess smiled, her heart light. "Yes, I think we are." They sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance in the cool night air. The princess realized that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was ready. She had made it this far, and with Jackson by her side, she felt like there was nothing they couldn't face. As the night stretched on, the stars above them seemed brighter than ever. The future was uncertain, but for the first time the princess felt like she was in control of her own destiny. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure: she was ready to face it. And as the fire burned low, she leaned back, feeling the warmth on her skin, knowing that this was only the beginning. With Jackson at her side, the world was hers to explore, and the future was waiting to be written.